name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, then welcome to my channel, and today's video is going to be some Pride Month book recommendations. This is part 2 of this video. Part 1 went up last year and I will have that video linked down below in the description if you want to check that one out as well. We do have a lot of books to talk about today. Their content warnings will be linked down below in the description along with some LGBTQ+ resources. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And the first book that we are going to be talking about today is Flip the Script by Lyla Lee. This follows our main character who lands the lead role in a brand new K-drama. She agrees to a contracted romance with her co-star, but she isn't really interested in him beyond what the contract entails. However, when the showrunner brings on a new lead actress that challenges our main character's role as the main love interest, our main character must fight to keep her position while also falling for her on-screen rival. This is a book that I read and loved very recently. It's very light, it's very fluffy, it's very fun, but it also does have its darker tones and more complex moments as well. And that is especially the case when it comes to the industry and how that combines with our character's queerness. And speaking of our characters, I found them all to be really likable, really sweet. I loved them and their relationships with one another. My favorite moments of this book were when our characters were just having fun together and going out on dates and just hanging out and just being around each other and happy, because I was happy when they were happy, and there were so many amazing moments throughout this book where that was the case. There is also an adorable sapphic romance in this book. They are one of my favorite romances of the year. I read this book in about 4 hours. It really brightened just my entire day. Critically, is this the best book in the world? No, but in my heart, it was definitely a huge favorite and just a huge comfort overall. Next up is Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. This is a book that blends Chinese history and mecha science fiction in a futuristic setting. The boys pilot giant transforming robots in order to battle the mecha aliens that are outside of the Great Wall, and the girls often dream of pairing up with these boys, even though they often die from the strain that this puts on their minds. This follows our main character who plans to assassinate the male pilot who is responsible for the death of her sister. However, when her vengeance comes, she ends up getting labeled as the Iron Widow and also paired with the strongest and most controversial male pilot. She uses this as an opportunity to figure out why the pilot system works in misogynistic ways and also stop more girls from getting sacrificed. This was such a refreshing read, especially for YA. Our main character and her frustrations and her anger, it was so brutal and so violent, and I really feel like this book went to places that other books would back away from, and they did it in a way that I really appreciated. This book also just has a ton of really cool ideas and concepts and well-written action scenes and scenery descriptions. It felt so atmospheric at times, and I also really loved the way that this book utilized romance. And on that note, there definitely were quite a few interesting dynamics and relationships in here. This is a story that can definitely feel tropey at times, and there was some dialogue that I just don't think really worked for it. But it had so much to offer in other areas that even though it did have those moments and they did take me out of the story some, I was always drawn right back in. This is a story that was brutal and violent and incredibly dark, but it was also just a ton of fun. Next up is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This takes place in the 1950s in San Francisco's Chinatown, and it follows our main character who realizes that she's in love with another girl as they walk under the neon sign of a lesbian bar known as the Telegraph Club. However, due to the time period and the setting, these two girls are not in a safe place to fall in love with one another. This was my first read of 2023, and I honestly don't know if I could have asked for a better first read. I love the writing style in here, and I do think that that is a huge part as to why this book stole my entire heart and why I still feel so emotionally connected to this book to this day. It has so many moments of pain and confusion, but it also has so many moments of beauty in there as well. I loved both of our main characters and I adored them together. I just wanted them to be happy and to have good things. And I also loved following our main character's journey. There's a lot of character growth and a lot of discovery. She lives in a world where there is a lot of ugliness around her, not only just related to her sexuality, but also the racism that she faces as a Chinese American. And something that really stuck out to me while I was reading this is that even though this book does take place in the 1950s, the terrible things that are happening in here are honestly not too far off from some of the terrible things that are happening today. Overall, there was just so much about this story that I loved, and I loved how it all came together, and I'm just so grateful that it exists. Next Next up is Let's Talk About Love by Kann. This takes place in the summer and follows our main character who has the perfect plans for how she wants to spend said summer. However, the only thing missing from her plans is her now ex-girlfriend who broke up with her after our main character came out to her as asexual, which is an outcome that has since turned our main character away from the dating scene. That is until she meets this guy that she is starting to have feelings for, but she isn't sure that she wants to risk their friendship for a love that may not be reciprocated or even understood. There were two things that I really loved about this book, so I want to focus on those first. The first is just our main character and her personality. It was honestly a joy just to read from her point of view. She is also asexual and biromantic, and the second thing that I loved about this book was just the exploration of her asexuality. And those are the aspects of this story that really carried this book for me. And while I will say that the relationships in this book were not the strongest for me, there were definitely moments where I was having fun with them and I was smiling. I will also say that I did not love the romance here. I think I will forever have mixed feelings about them. But like I said earlier, thankfully there was a lot of other stuff that I liked and that I could focus on instead of that. Next up is One Last Stop by McQuiston. One Last Stop is an adult romance that follows our main character who has recently moved to New York City. She doesn't really expect much out of her subway commute, but that all changes when she meets a girl on the train who saves her day when she needs it the most. Our main character's new crush becomes the best part of her day, but things get more complicated when she realizes that this girl has been literally displaced by time, and our main character is going to have to use everything that she left in her past in order to help her. This is a book that surprised me, even though it had no business surprising me because I knew that I was going to like this book going in, but what I don't think that I fully expected was just the emotional impact and attachment that I have towards this story, because I love and adore these characters so much. I love all of their relationships and all of the little details that went into them and crafting their personalities and how they interact with one another. There were so many fun and heartwarming moments between them. It was very found family. I also loved our main romance. I loved all of the romances in this book, and I just got so lost in everything that the story has to offer, and I loved how much the world here came to life. I also loved the discussions surrounding feeling lost and finding your path. Like, the coming of age themes in here really resonated with me in a way that I am so grateful for. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and like last night at the Telegraph Club, it is very high up on that list. Next up is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. Pet takes place in the city of Lucille, where monsters no longer exist, or at least that's what our main character and the other children in the city have always been taught. But when a creature emerges from her mother's painting in order to hunt down a monster, our main character must question everything that she has been told regarding monsters and her city. This was just such an incredibly interesting read all around, although I do think it could have dug a little bit deeper when it comes to the setting and the magical elements, but that is like my only complaint. The friendships in this book were super cute, and there were so many good discussions throughout this story. I specifically really appreciated the commentary surrounding monsters in a setting like Lucille, and I especially appreciated that when it was combined with a discussion surrounding censorship. As this is a dark story in a very utopian setting, I've read this book twice now, and I've only grown to appreciate it more with each read. There's a lot of layers and a lot of symbolism, and the way it all combined just made for such an interesting read. Or in this case for me, reads. Next up is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker-Chan. This is an adult fantasy and the first book in the Radiant Emperor duology, and it is a reimagining of the Emperor of the Ming Dynasty's rise to power. Like Flip the Script, this was a very recent read for me, and this is a book that just captured my full attention almost immediately just through the writing style alone. And once I realized just how much I love the writing style, I was completely done and just completely immersed in everything that this book had going on. There were some really complex and interesting characters in this story, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of trauma that has shaped them, but there are also moments of growth throughout the story that felt so impactful and meaningful. This is a story that has a lot of different moving parts to it, especially when it comes to the war strategy and the politics, and it was just so interesting to see what everyone's next moves were going to be. This is also a book that talks a lot about fate and desire, and I loved this. It was honestly pretty motivating at times, and I just loved how the author incorporated these discussions, especially when it comes to our characters' decision making. And just reading how their past and their drives has shaped these characters when it comes to their personalities and decision making just all was so compelling. And so was this book as a whole, honestly, because what I loved most about it was just how it all came together. Next up is So This Is Ever After by F.T. Lukens. This follows our main character after he completes his prophecy of saving the kingdom from its evil ruler, and now he and his companions have no idea what to do with themselves. Which, you know, understandable. His friends convince him to take up the throne until the heir can take his place, but then she dies and he ends up stuck there. He now needs a spouse before his upcoming 18th birthday, or else he will fade away into nothing. My only complaints about this book is that I do wish the pacing was a little bit different when it comes to the character growth. But at the end of the day, is that what I remember from this book? No, absolutely not. Because I remembered this book for being cozy and adorable and just so much fun. I thought that this book had so much great comedy and banter and just overall cast chemistry. I also really love the romance. Like, I need to read more Best Friends to Lovers, and these two showed that to me. I said in my full review of this book that the romance kind of felt like the Idiots in Love fanfiction tag, and I love that for them. This story does feel very much like a rom-com mixed with a fairy tale, and I really love that combination. It was super fun. And the story just made my heart feel so happy and content and safe, even though there was angst that did play with my emotions. Like, how dare you, but also I love you for that. So even though I do wish the story went a little bit deeper at certain points, there was just so much else about this that I loved and adored, and that distracted me from that. And I just really ended up loving this story. Next up is The City Beautiful by Aden Polydoros. This is set in 1983 and follows our main character who dreams that he will one day have enough money to bring his mom and his sisters from the oppression that they face in Romania to America. However, his dream begins to fall from his grasp when his best friend becomes the latest victim in a large group of Jewish boys who are being murdered. While the rest of the city is celebrating the World's Fair, our main character is thrust into a world of corruption and deceit and back into the arms of a dangerous boy from his past. And these two must work together to find the killer before the killer claims them next. As you can probably tell by the description that I just gave, this is a really dark story, so again, reminder, the content warnings for all of the books in this video will be linked down below in the description. This is one that I do think had some slower moments that did unfortunately make me lose interest in what I was reading, but it also did have a ton of really interesting twists and concepts that would just bring me right back in. The story also had a lot of mystery elements, and I loved all of those. I also feel like the time period was captured really well, and I did end up feeling pretty attached to these characters by the end of the story, so yeah, it was a little longer than I thought it would be, but other than the moments where I felt that way, this was a really interesting and compelling read. Next up is The Deep by River Solomon. This follows the water-dwelling descendants of African slave women who were thrown overboard by the slave owners. Our main character holds these memories for her people as they are too traumatic to be remembered all of the time. This is a role that is very demanding of her, so when it comes time for her to share these memories, she flees before she can take them back. This is a novella. It's another one that I've read twice, and I really enjoyed it the first time, but the second time was when things started to really work for me. For example, I have grown to really appreciate the writing style, and there were just so many lines that I thought were so beautiful. I also loved how much of a deep dive we got to do into our main character and how we got to learn the history of these characters. And it's told through a non-linear narrative, and I love the way it all came together, although I do wish maybe that it flowed a little more gradually between the time periods, or maybe there could have just been like a signifier that something switched over. But I figured it out, so it doesn't really matter. And even though it didn't fully keep my attention during my first read due to a very unfortunate reading slump, it definitely held my attention the second time around, and I really enjoyed it. Next up is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. This follows our main character who was outed by her crush and ex-best friend at her previous school. Now at her new Catholic school, she has no intentions of coming out or falling in love. Which is a lot easier said than done, as the only openly queer girl at her school is annoyingly perfect. But if word gets back to her mom, our main character could face much worse than rejection. This is another book that just stole my heart and took me on a complete roller coaster because my emotions were all over the place here while reading this. I got super attached to these characters, and like, they go through so much throughout this short book, and it's not that long of a book, but it felt so well paced and I just never wanted to put it down. There were moments where I was laughing and smiling, and then there were also moments where I was tearing up. I also loved reading from her main character's point of view because she has such a fun and lovable personality. And this book has a ton of really sweet and fun moments between the characters, from the romance to the family relationships to the friendships. There were a couple of moments where I do think this book kind of contradicted itself in a way that did take me out of the story, but other than those moments, I was fully immersed in the story the entire way through. Next up is This Poison Heart by Kalynn Bayron. This follows our main character who has a hidden power over plants. When she inherits a house from her birth mother, she also gains a space to test out her powers. But as she begins to bring the garden back to life, she also uncovers a dark secret, and her ancestors are not going to let her be until she accepts that she is the keeper of the dark power of the poison garden. So this spot in this video is for this book, but it's also technically for the sequel too. But I have very mixed feelings about this sequel, so I'm mostly going to be focusing on this Poison Heart, but there are things that I'm going to say that can apply to both. First and foremost, I love the plant magic. There were some really cool things going on and some really fun and dangerous plants with beautiful descriptions. And I also loved getting to explore this house. It felt so mysterious and very fall-like to me, and I actively search for that now when I'm hauling books, and that's all thanks to this one. And that can also apply to outside of the house as well, and just with the entire town. I also loved our main character and her relationship with her moms. It was so fun and sweet and heartwarming, and there were a ton of really interesting relationships and characters in here. As for the romance, I really liked them in this Poison Heart. I didn't like them as much in this Wicked Fate, so I don't really know how I feel about them overall, but what I will say is that they do have some really fun and sweet moments. This book had just so many interesting and cool concepts that kept me reading the entire way through, so even though I didn't love this entire series, I definitely loved this first one, and that is more than enough for me. So we are going to end this video off by talking about my favorite book of all of the books that I read last year, which is the Sunbearer Trials by Aden Thomas. 10 semi-DOCs are chosen to compete in the Sunbearer Trial so that the loser can be sacrificed so that their body can protect everyone for the next 10 years. Our main character is the trans son of the goddess of birds, and he's never really worried about the trials other than worrying about others in regards to the trials. However, that all changes when he gets chosen to compete against opponents who are better trained and more powerful than himself. I knew that I was going to love this book going in, and yet it somehow managed to not only meet those high expectations, but also exceed them. I loved our main character, we gelled immediately, and I really loved his character growth. It was all so lovely. And I also really loved and or appreciated a lot of the characters in this book and just how they contributed to the overall story. But what I think that I love most of all is just the friendship between our main character and his best friend. I don't know if I can accurately describe just how much fun and heartwarming their dynamic was. Like, they are definitely one of my favorite friendships that I have ever read. As for the trials, they were very reality competition show-like, which was very fun, and these characters do get brutally competitive with each other, which again, fun. I also loved getting to travel to all of the different settings that they went to, and of course, I also loved the romance. They have a personality contrast that I am always weak for when it comes to my ships, and these two were no exception to that. And I also feel like the story is going in some incredibly interesting directions, so I cannot wait for the sequel to come out. And while we're talking about Aden Thomas, Cemetery Boys was in part 1 of my Pride Month book recommendations video, but I cannot recommend this author enough. Cemetery Boys and the Sunbearer Trials were my top 2 favorite books of the last 2 years, and I just cannot wait to read more. Okay, so that is all of the books that I have for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and answer the question that'll be around here if you want to do that, and hopefully I will see you here next time. Bye!